as many people as possible should be able to engage. We will take the questions from those who are online. I will get them on the phone and I will be able to repeat those questions to everybody who is here. Thank you once again for coming. There are 5 events happening today, especially here in Pretoria. Even the Chinese embassy and others are hosting very big events. So there are people who are online there, but here, and there might be some of you who are here, but also online linked to something elsewhere. We've got about there are 1,000 people who are online, so we have to make sure that when we speak, we use the microphone. Otherwise, we will lose them and they will not actively participate because they will not have heard what we say. Thank you very much. They can come. We may rise. Please be seated, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Those of you who are here and those of you who are joining online, welcome to the NSG Masterclass on Building Professional and Meritocratic Bureaucracies, a challenge for South Africa and the Global South. In the intervention by Professor Zhang, you will get a sense of why we made reference to South Africa and the Global South because of some of the waves that are taking place in the Global South today and the imperatives of building meritocratic bureaucracies. Firstly, I wish to welcome and thank Prof. Zodwa Motsa. She's our host today. We are co-hosting this with UNISA. The Vice Chancellor is traveling, and Professor Zodwa Motsa is a Deputy Vice Chancellor, is our host this morning. Thank you for being gracious, Prof, to join us in hosting this, and every other member of the UNISA community, including students who are joining this online. And of course, President Motlanthe, thank you for being here. He's always supporting the work of the National School of Government and comes to these interventions as today. And then Dr. Nkuna, DG, DPME in the presidency, who will be doing the summary and challenging us. It's important because he is the one who needs to make sure that some of the key lessons emanating from here need to find expression in the broader government program of action. And of course, our guest today, Professor Zhang Weiwei from Fudan University. He's here for this lecture and another lecture that is taking place tomorrow. There's a seminar on governance that is being hosted. That's the event where he will be tomorrow. And hopefully on Sunday, we can take him to Soweto, to a Shisanyama, Kawash in Soweto, to experience some South African hospitality there. And good morning and welcome to all of you who are here. There's DGs. In fact, you must acknowledge there's the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly is here, before he calls me to order. So thanks for joining us, the Directors Generals, former Directors Generals, as well as the leadership of the NGO. So Prof. Zang, in government offices, when we refer to the party, because of the separation of party and state in South Africa, we call it the NGO when we talk about the ruling party. So the leadership of the NGO is members of the National Executive are also here, and colleagues from other different departments. So we are going to have a contained conversation with all of you. There will be 4 microphones that will be roving. You raise your hand and they will be coming through to you. Please make sure you speak to the microphone. There is over 1,000 people who are going to be denied the opportunity to hear. If you close this out, those are people who are on the Zoom platform. There are others who are watching in other social media platforms, including SABC as well. That will be covering some of what will be happening here. So basically, you've all seen the program, and that is how then we will be running it. We want to get as much as possible from yourselves who's attending this conversation, and so we will be making sure that we have an ability to do so. And those who are online, we will be taking your questions in writing. Please do write on the chat platform. I will be able to read those questions here. So welcome once again, colleagues, and thank you for joining us this morning. Let me welcome Prof. Zodwa Motsa, who's our host, then to welcome us to her house.
Thank you, Prof. Naweni, for setting the scene. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm scared of mics because of my very elaborate height. Thank you very much, Prof. Naweni, for setting the scene. Your Excellency, third President of the Republic of South Africa, let me indicate that I do not use former. I just use the number. I don't like former. I don't like X. Third President of the Republic of South Africa, Professor Zhang Wei, Director of the China Institute of Fudan University, Prof. Naweni, Principal of the National School of Governance, honorable members in this audience and online, honorable guests and students, Kusile. Kusile. You say yebo. I'm doing it deliberately because we are forgetting our languages. We are stuck on Sawubona, which is fine, but it has dawned. It's a new day. Ladies and gentlemen, mine is a very short stint on the stage. I have specific messages that go to our honored guests as well as all of you participating here. I've been sent by my Vice Chancellor, Professor Puleng Kabula, to actually say you are most welcome to the University of South Africa, President Motlanthe and Prof. Zhang Wei. We express our sincerest welcome for you to be here and enjoy our hosting of this event. The VC would have dearly loved to be in attendance, but currently she is traveling in East Africa. As you know, we are in more than 40, 50 countries where we actually are putting our footprint in the activities academic. Sincere apologies on her behalf. I have been requested specifically to convey this message to Prof. Zhang Wei that he should stay a little longer than planned so that he can engage with our master's and doctoral students, because we are creating a cadre of intellectuals that we are going to unleash to the rest of the world, and they will have the same kind of global impact that Prof has. So stay longer. I don't know the visa arrangements, Prof, but there you are. The Vice Chancellor also wishes to remind us, ladies and gentlemen, that we owe this kind of partnership to Professor David Maimela, who is central to motivating the school to partner with us. We are grateful for that. You may ask yourselves, why UNISA? Why partner with a school that is intent on creating a capable, ethical, and worthy state? I, for one, believe that this university is well positioned to take on such kinds of programs. Well positioned in the sense that it is a university that does not only call itself after the name of this country, but it is a university that long ago, more than 15 years back, started the matter of digging into our own systems as Africans, looking at our own values, at our own philosophies, and at our own epistemologies. It is a university that says, start in Africa, know yourself, bring out your systems first before you can compete with the rest of the world. So when we have China coming over and we are collaborating with China, what we are saying is that we're not going to use any other terms of reference but our own. And I believe we have a lot which we have not yet given time to come out. This is what the University of South Africa does, ladies and gentlemen, in its agenda for transformation, decoloniality, and centralizing Africa. I want to stop here and just read something from the China Africa magazine. It talks about the parity of esteem between knowledges or civilizations. And the writer says, civilizations vary from each other, just as human beings differ in terms of skin color and the language they use. No civilization is superior to others. To believe that one's own race and civilization are above others is foolish. If everyone looked and thought the same way, the world would be very, very dull. Likewise, it would be less interesting with one homogeneous civilization. I want to say Africa has it. It's lying somewhere. And our collaboration as part of the Global South is actually speaking to the multiplicities of civilizations that we can share. You are most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Motsa, for welcoming us here on behalf of the leadership of the biggest university in Africa, collaborating with the fastest growing school of government in Africa. And that's a fact, actually. The numbers speak for themselves. President, even 2 weeks ago, we had a former deputy president in our office in an intimate session with 100 senior managers in our building. We've had former heads of state coming from different countries coming to our building as well. So there is, I suppose, a convergence, Prof. Motsa, in the biggest university in Africa with the fastest growing school of government in Africa, hosting one of the most influential policy, I would say, makers or opinion maker in China, and of course someone who is very much intimate in his knowledge about how the state works in China and the Global South. Prof. Zhang.
Thank you, Usani, for your kind invitation. And thank you, Vice Chancellor Mosta, for your nice, warm words. And I'm very much honored to come to this master class, and also with the presence of the former President, Your Excellency, Mr. Munglansi, and with this distinguished audience and professors and students. Well, today I will touch on a topic which I try to describe as the China model and its possible global implications. And what I will say is my own research findings, not representing any government institutions, my personal view as a scholar. And I got about 40 minutes, so I try to do well in this limited time, give you overall presentation on the Chinese model and China's progress, as well as the key messages from the Chinese success and the nature of the Chinese state. About 5 or 6 years ago, there was a question on Quora, why there was still no revolt or color revolution in China against the so-called communist dictatorship. And then a student from my hometown, Shanghai, simply put these two pictures. One is Shanghai of 1990, the other Shanghai 2010. He said, that explains everything. In other words, it's really a success model of modernization that makes the Chinese experience worth explaining to the audience here and to the global audience as well. Now, I'll give you a quick overview of the rise of China. So, roughly, if you take the past 42 years, 43 years as a whole, China had managed an annual GDP growth rate 9%, annual trade growth rate 15%. So total GDP by the year 2021 was over $17.7 trillion. That's by the official exchange rate. But by the purchasing power parity, it's already over $24 trillion. That's by the year 2021. In other words, China became the largest economy by purchasing power parity. In fact, from 2014, so it's already 9 years since China became the largest economy. However, the Chinese government is always very modest, as they don't want to call China as the largest economy. I'm exceptionally, as a scholar, I have to call spade a spade. I've been to the United States many times. I've been to over 100 countries. I know the economy is larger than the US economy. And the trade volume, $6 trillion. What's important is the eradication of poverty. This most impressive part of the Chinese modernization. China has eradicated extreme poverty across the country. In other words, the least well-lived Chinese today live better life than Skid Row's situation in California. Yeah. The kind of homeless, poverty-stricken people in China, no longer there. I will explain a bit with figures later. This is the official figure from Chinese government, 770 million people lifted out of extreme poverty. If it's the World Bank figure, it's even higher, because Chinese figure is slightly more demanding than the World Bank figure. And China is also the largest exporter of tourists, 150 million by the year 2019. Due to COVID, it declined. But same, within China, the tourism is booming. Outside, they are coming. So more will come to South Africa, I'm pretty sure. This figure is important. Average life expectancy. For the first time, China has a higher life expectancy than the United States. For the year 2021, China reached 78.2. United States was 76.1. And that explains a lot. I'll explain later if I got time. And furthermore, if you read the mainstream media in the West, BBC or CNN, they try to always present China in a very negative light, which I think is against common sense. So whenever, if you only read Western media or media in your country strongly influenced by the Western media, then if you go to China, you will be very much surprised from the very first sight you arrive in China. I always say Shanghai is a much better city than New York. If you look at the per capita GDP, New York is 4 times higher than Shanghai. But the New York's GDP is, how should I describe, 80%, if not more, services industry, banking, financial, whatever, yeah. But the Chinese, Shanghai's GDP is very solid. Then if you look at the life expectancy, Shanghai is 5 years longer than New Yorkers. Yeah. Street safety, 10 times better. Infrastructure, 20 years ahead. Child mortality rate, much lower than New York. In other words, we have to rechange this kind of way how this GDP is calculated. So I tend to use per capita purchasing power parity rather than nominal GDP by US dollars. What's also amazing is China has achieved what I call 4 industrial revolutions in one. For historical reasons, China missed the first and second industrial revolutions. But over the past 4 decades and more, China simply went through from one industrial revolution to another. Roughly, with every 10 years, you experience one industrial revolution. So all those Chinese, say, in the age of 30 or something, or above, have literally experienced from agricultural civilization to industrial civilization to information civilization. Now China is the only country that has achieved one smartphone. You can do everything. No cash, no paper money for 5 years. You can do everything. And also China's 4G station, 5G stations represent 70% of the world's total. So wherever you go to remote mountains, in Himalaya, you got the Wi-Fi. Yeah. Every village is covered in China, 1.4 billion people. That's socialism, you have to cover. That's why you can use online payment wherever you go. And what's more important is if you look at the first industrial revolution, that's textiles. So China became the largest textile power in the early 1990s, 1995. The second industrial revolution is about power industry. China surpassed the United States in terms of power generation in the year 2010. And then home manufacturing industries. And then the third industrial revolution is about communications. China was way behind the West in the 2G, 3G. But at level of 4G, China became on the par with and began to surpass. In 5G, led by Huawei, China is the leader. And now China and the United States, I think, are the only 2 countries are in the, I would say, premier group of the fourth industrial revolution. Big data, AI technology, quantum technology, etc. And this is my own personal experience in the year 1985, when at that time Prime Minister Mugabe of Zimbabwe came to China, and he met with Chairman Deng Xiaoping, and I was their interpreter. And Deng tried to explain to Mugabe, China remains socialist, because Mugabe was a bit suspicious China's reform and open door policy may move into capitalism. So this is a very important talk. Deng basically made a few points. Number one, we have the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. This is what I call the holistic interest party. 2, public ownership of the means of production. yeah, from land to strategic resources, etc. So Deng basically said we dare to make all kinds of reform experiments so long as we have these two key things, leadership of the party and public ownership of the means of production. We can invite foreign investors. We have private enterprises. Today, private sector creates 90% jobs in China. Yeah, so it's I will come to that mixed economy, public and private sector. But on strategic part, the state sector plays a major role. And I wrote an article 17 years back for International Herald Tribune, now part of New York Times. And basically I said the kind of allure of the Chinese model is evident because that one article was published in the year 2006. That was the first China-African summit held in Beijing. And more African leaders came to Beijing than they went to African summit on that particular year. I said they came to China not only for trade, investment, but also for learning something about the Chinese model of development. And I said the Chinese model in this article, the Chinese model, however imperfect, has worked far more effectively than what can be called the American model, as represented by the IMF designed structural readjustment program for sub-Saharan Africa and shock therapy for Russia. I'm very critical of the American model. I said it's largely ideological driven. It imposed liberalization before safety nets were set up, privatization before regulatory frameworks were put in place, and democratization before a culture of political tolerance and rule of law was established. The end result has often been discouraging and even devastating. Then I made a prediction: so long as the American model remains unable to deliver the desired outcome as shown so clearly in failures from Haiti to the Philippines to Iraq, the Chinese model will become more appealing to the world's poor. So that's the remark and prediction I made back in the year 2006. It remains valid. I said I well remember Chairman Deng Xiaoping telling the visiting president of Ghana, Chairman Rawlings, in September 1985. I was also their interpreter. Deng said, please don't copy our model. If there is any experience on our part, it's to formulate policies in light of your own national conditions. That's key message from the Chinese model. And then I said that perhaps attitude makes all the difference. China is viewed by others as modest, America as arrogant. China leads by example, America by lectures and sanctions, if not missiles. So the American way of behavior has remained like that, as it should change. Ours, the United States, needs more political reform than many other countries. In this article, I listed these key elements of the Chinese model, and I will explain very briefly, because I will go on to other topics and come back to some of the key elements of the Chinese model. People matter, or people-centered approach, which means virtually from cradle to grave, all this whole lifespan of most people are the focus of the work of the Chinese government. Practice-based reasoning, which means you refuse any dogma, whether from the West or from the East. From the West, for instance, democracy, Western style, is the best system. We said, no, it's not true. Yeah. And from the East, say, state planning is the best. We say, no, it's not true. So we have to be creative. And number three is constant experimentation. For one thing, China is a vast country. You cannot afford, doing something at random or in an irrational way. You have to start with certain experiments somewhere. When it proves to be good, you extend across the country. And then you have a developmental state. In other words, you have the state which is proactive, which protects stability and also provides strategic planning, not Soviet-style mandatory planning, but strategic planning. I'll come to that. And then China is also from a culture of learning. We love to learn from others. Confucius, Chinese famous philosopher, said, if you are with another two persons, one of them can be your teacher. In other words, you can learn a lot from others. Even from the West, we have learned quite a lot from the West, but selective learning, not blindly copying others. And then sequencing is also important. Which reform first, which reform second. Otherwise, it will be messing. For instance, in the case of China, it's always, if you took the past 4 decades as a whole, we start from rural areas, from coastal areas into industry, and from industry into commerce, and from, even for open door policy, from coast to the Yangtze River, and then to the border regions. So it's a very methodological approach. For one thing, because the country is too complicated, it's huge. I call China a civilizational state, an amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. And then mixed economy, the state plays its role, the market also plays its role, and the two are largely complementary. And finally, there should be a balance between the three powers: political power, social power, capital power, in favor of majority of the population. The key message from, if there any role of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, that's the key role, to make sure China policies, economic, social, cultural, political, they will deliver tangible goods for most Chinese people. So this is important. Now I'll make a quick comparison with the United States, because there is a dispute concerning the concept of democracy. If by the Western standards, say one person, one vote, multi-party system, this is democracy. Chinese disagree. We think this is at best procedural democracy. It's not necessarily substantial democracy. So I said, how can we discuss democracy with our Western friends? I said, let's borrow the famous line from Abraham Lincoln, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And let's compare China and the United States on these three categories. Let's look at for the people. I just use one statistic to illustrate this. It's very clear. You can see in terms of net household assets, Chinese urban households, which means close to 800 million people, median level, net household assets, median level, which means not average level. See, this hall has 300 people. It's a level of 150. That's median level. In the median level, Chinese urban families are already higher than United States in terms of net household assets, median level. I don't have the figure for Chinese countryside because we don't have this figure yet. If there is one, I could also draw a comparison. So that would be amazing. But if you have 800 million people who already have a higher net assets than the Americans, it's already something important. Eradication of poverty. We have a saying in Chinese, 两保证, 2 insurances. Assurance for enough food, assurance for enough clothing. Yeah. And then 3 guarantees. Guarantee for compulsory education, guarantee for decent housing, guarantee for medical insurance. So China achieved this objective by the year 2020. So we eradicated extreme poverty. Yeah. This is by no means easy. With Chinese Communist Party send 3 million cadres down to these grassroots villages, living, working together with poor peasants there, and make sure She said, you must stay there until you're lifted out of poverty. Compulsory. This is the deadline. In the end, we achieved that great success. I've already explained the life expectancy. Before, when New China was founded in the year 1914, life expectancy in China was 35. Now it's 78.2. Yeah, it's higher than United States by 2 years. Now let's look at off people. We have the different surveys, but 95% of the Chinese civil servants come from ordinary background. Then I don't have the exact figure for the United States, so I simply quote this famous line from Stiglitz, Professor Economist Stiglitz, government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. Even half of Americans tend to agree with that assessment. Of course, the government of the rich and for the rich. Now, the key difference between China and the United States is by the people. How can we achieve by the people? If multi-party and universal suffrage mean government by the people, then why so many so-called democracies are not working well? People have this mentality, this feeling, elect and regret. So from the Chinese point of view, we consider there is two levels of democracy. One is procedural democracy, the other is substantive democracy. And in the Chinese philosophy, we always say there is a Dao and Shu. Dao means grand, objective. Shu means specifics, rules, etc. So procedural democracy is Shu. There must be something above that. In other words, the purpose of democracy, the overall objective of democracy. In the case of China, it's good governance. Very clear. Yeah. So you have to produce good governance. And then from that objective, you explore democratic systems and procedures appropriate to your national conditions. That's how China handled the whole issue of democracy. Whether the West accepts or not, we don't care. Our system has worked and worked very well. If you look at the quality of decision made by the Chinese Communist Party, each and every 5-year plan, the process of democratic consultation, hundreds, thousands of rounds of consultation at different levels of Chinese society, think tanks, within the party, outside the party. In the end, they produce a strategic plan, and then it can be carried out, executed. Yeah. For the Chinese, the American system is a system which is surreal. It cannot solve problems. Can the United States solve the gun control, gun violence problem? Can the United States ensure medical insurance for all? Can the United States solve the drug problem, etc.? Another interesting anecdote is some American scholars find that the Chinese state is more or less governed by engineers because all the top leaders have the engineering degrees. Yeah. The American system is run by the lawyers. For the engineers, it's very clear. You have a problem, and you try to find out what's wrong with whatever, 1, 2, 3 problems, and then you try to solve them one by one. So the Chinese approach is very simple, very straightforward. Yeah, we call it practice-based reasoning. Yeah. Now, behind all this is a concept which I have developed. I call China a civilizational state. In other words, as you know, we have ancient Egyptian civilization, ancient Mesopotamian civilization, ancient Hindu civilization, and ancient Chinese civilization, etc. But China is one of the very few that has survived to this day and continue to this day. A key symbol of this is Chinese language. We are still using this language which were evolved beginning from 3,500 years ago. Same structure, yeah. So we can read easily works written by Confucius 2,500 years ago, we can still read. So in other words, this line of culture and continuation has continued to this day. So China is an amalgam of an ancient civilization with a huge modern state. That's the key message, and make China very different from many other countries. And this kind of state, Chinese civilization state, has four supers: super large population, super large territory, super long traditions, and super rich cultures. And what's more important, each of these super is a blend of old and new. I can give an example. China is the most populous country, now surpassed by India, but anyway, largest population, or one of them. But this is a historical inheritance. It's always a large country in terms of population. So in this sense, this is ancient. Yet, it's also modern, because people are well educated. It's, now the literacy rate in China is much higher than the United States. It's 97%. United States is slightly less than 80%. Yeah, it's going down rather going forward. And every year, China produces more engineers than the Western countries combined. Yeah. Even today, most Chinese high school students, given a choice, they prefer to study hard science, engineering. So this is something remarkable. And so the Chinese Communist Party is very much modernization oriented. We must make China first-rate modern country with modern industry, modern science, modern technology. Territory is a vast continent. You fly for 3 hours, still within China. This is something left from the past, inherited from our ancestors. Yet it's connected with the best infrastructure in the world: bullet trains, highway systems, and digital infrastructure. Wherever you go, there is internet signals, so Wi-Fi, yeah. And then super long tradition. For instance, I discussed with Basani several times, the Chinese system of meritocracy is inherited from China past. China is the country that invented civil servant examination system. And then we exported to UK and to other countries. So this based on meritocracy. Now the Chinese Communist Party has evolved this kind of system from the ancient one into modern one. In the ancient one, it's more or less based on book knowledge, yeah, on Confucius classics, more about liberal arts. Now it's far more emphasis on your capability, your competence, your can-do spirit, your experience in the grassroots. Yeah. If you look at Chinese leader like Xi Jinping, he worked as #1 of a Chinese province, Fujian province, Zhejiang province, and Shanghai municipality, which is a province level municipality. So he governed these 3 provinces, which means before he came to current position, he has already governed over 120 million people, given the size of China, and governed an economy more or less the size of India, the 3 provinces of China put together. With this kind of experience, he was promoted to member of the standing committee of the political bureau, one of the top 7. Yeah. And then he will give another 5 years to get familiar with national affairs. Then he was promoted to the #1 general secretary of the party and president of the party. So it's one of the most demanding job in the world, and the criteria as well. So I can say with certainty the Chinese leadership is among the most competent in the world. Virtually all these members of the political bureau, not to mention the top 7, have governed at least 2 provinces. or three provinces before they come to current positions. And then super rich culture as well. I don't want to explain. If you try Chinese food, cuisine, we have 8 main schools of cuisine, etc. And whether in terms of arts, in terms of literature, in terms of medicine, in terms of state governance, in terms of military strategy, China all has its own traditions. Now these old and new are combined. I want to say a few words on the Chinese Communist Party, because in the West, it's always described as a one-party dictatorship. This is misleading, because Chinese Communist Party is not a party in the Western sense. China, given a civilizational state, was first unified in 221 BC. 221 BC, over 2,200, 300 years ago. From then on, China, in most of time, was a unified country. And Chinese political system was what I call always a unified ruling entity, always like this. Because without this kind of unified ruling entity, the country immediately disintegrated, split up. China tried American model in the year 1911, what we call the Republic Revolution. Yeah. And then the country degenerated into civil wars, controlled by warlords, fighting with each other. Each warlord was supported by one particular Western power. And then millions of lives were lost. So if you have to say China is a one-party system, I will tell you over the past 2,000 years, China was under one-party rule, if you prefer to call this one-party system. But this one-party system was buttressed, sustained by meritocracy through very demanding exams of all types. Only the most competent can be the prime minister. In theory, at least, we do have very poor and poorly run dynasties. But on the whole, this philosophy is there. Even you compare China and Europe over the past 2,000 years, China was the largest economy by early 19th century. Yeah. So China was in many ways more advanced than Europe for many, many, many centuries under so-called one-party rule. Yeah. But within one unified ruling entity, like within the CPC, we have intra-party democracy. Policies were debated seriously, before they reach consensus and then move the nation forward. As we all know, New China was the result of the communist revolution, especially 22 years of armed struggle. I always tell my American friends, I said, don't play with fire. In the Cold War, Russia and Soviet Union did not fight with each other. It's cold, but in Asia it was hot. China and the United States fought 2 wars, in the Korean battlefield in the 1950s, in the Vietnamese battlefield in the 1960s and early 70s. In both wars, the United States lost. So don't play with fire. We are very patient. We don't want to fight war with anyone. But if you really say on the issue of Taiwan, there's no way, because this is within Chinese constitution. One message from civilization states always, whenever country broke up, split up, the trend was moving towards unification over the past 2,000 years. So that's part of Chinese gene, no way to change it. And this 22 years of armed struggle allowed China to be very confident, because highly independent, thoroughly independent. It's one of the very few countries which can say no to the United States. We say no all the time. Yeah. And then China was divided into Chairman Mao's period and Chairman Deng's period. Chairman Mao's period laid the foundation for China's industrialization, modernization at certain costs. And since Chairman Deng Xiaoping, we began to move this towards reform and open up And on the whole, this is a successful program. And I discussed this already. There are a few features from this civilization state, which historical selection plus election. So the American system, Western political system is called election. The Chinese system is more or less selection plus election. It's a vigorous process. If you want to study the Chinese model of development or modernization, two institutions are really important to note. One is what we call, the name changes from time to time, but now it's called the State Reform and the Development Commission, which is in the past called State Planning Commission. Yeah. Now it's called the Reform and Development Commission, which is produce 5-year plans. Very important. How democracy Chinese style has worked, how decisions are made that way. Yeah. The other is the CPC's organizational department, which is exercise and promote this selection plus election. Yeah. And then in Chinese, after Confucius, we have quite a few famous philosophers. This is called the Mencius. He raised the concept of Mingxing and Mingyi, which are very modern in many ways. Mingxing means the hearts and minds of the people, the long-term interest of the people. Mingyi means public opinion. He said we should make distinction between public opinion and the long-term interest of the people. So how we can, in the time of social media and the internet and money politics, everywhere we see populism sweeping, yeah, in the West, in non-Western countries as well. But China, one of few countries that can overcome somewhat this issue of populism. Behind this is Mencius' idea. Hearts and minds, long-term interest of people are paramount. So public opinion may reflect long-term interest, may not reflect long-term interest. So the leadership must have the ability to really see this clearly. And it should be governance by Mingxing, by long-term interest. Yeah. This is a consultative democracy. If there is anything particular we are very proud of in the Chinese democratic system, is a consultative democracy, which not only at the party central committee, top leadership, but also in every company, in my institute, in my university. Yeah, we have this culture, you know. Those who go to China may know we have this WeChat revolution. Everyone got a smartphone with a WeChat, which combined the function of Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, everything in one, you know. And you can form a group anytime we discuss everything. Yeah. Behind this is a very simple reason. China is 1.4 billion people. In any Western-style democracy, if a decision was adopted, say with 80% or 70% support, then it's overwhelming majority support. Yeah. In the case of China, even 10% disagree. It's 140 million people. Yeah. So this kind of size means you have to consult with people. Yeah. So all kinds of consultation going on all the time, but we can reach consensus. I would say, you know, democracy without making a decision tends to be populist. Yeah. Democracy with what we call the centralizing. With in the end, you reach consensus making decision. That's quality democracy. Then you can move the nation forward. Otherwise, you cannot move the nation forward. My conclusions. First is socialism has succeeded in China. Yeah. This is very important. As a result, you know, China being smeared all the time in the Western mainstream media. It reminds me of the famous line from the Communist Manifesto, a specter of the whatever communism is haunting the West. Yeah. But here, a specter of the Chinese model is haunting many in the West, United States in particular. Yeah. but have no way to stop it. It's just gain the support of Chinese people. It's 1.4 billion people. We don't need approval of the United States. Yeah. And it's by purchasing power parity, already the world's largest economy since the year 2014. So it's already 9 years, or by official exchange rate, maybe within 5 to 10 years. It's middle class, real middle class with properties will become already larger than the US population, 400 million people. We expect this middle class will be twice of the US population in less than 10 years. China has also achieved the medical insurance and pension for all. That's already achieved. Of course, the level of insurance still differs from region to region. That's something China should tackle, and China is tackling now. China also has the largest home ownership. In the countryside, it's 100%. In the cities, it's 85 to 90%. So most people are property owners. And I mentioned, you remember, this China has achieved what I call the 4 industrial revolutions in one. This is very important for the global order and its change. Because we all know this dependency theory, center, periphery. The Western countries are the center. Developing countries, global south, are peripheral. And the peripheral is dependent on the center. The center make huge profits with all kinds of advantage, privileges. And the south live miserable life, etc. But China's breakthrough through these 4 industrial revolutions in one means that China has successfully broken away from this center peripheral order. China itself became a center. China is simultaneously the largest partner for the periphery and for the center. China now is the largest trading partner with over 140 countries. So this simultaneously large the trading partner with both center and peripheral in terms of trade, in terms of financial resources, in terms of technologies, etc. Of course, now the United States wanted to decouple, so-called decoupling and de-risking, whatever, from China. But the US companies, enterprises are unwilling to do that. It will be very difficult. So in this world today, if you want to isolate China, I think you yourself will be isolated. Because China is such an economy, such a size and trading partner with all. And we prefer win-win as championed by this Belt and Road Initiative based on what we call the key message, discussing together, building together, benefiting together. It's a new type of globalization, totally different from the old type of new liberal globalization. And then China model inspire and will inspire many other countries to explore their own paths to success. And it will also have tremendous impact on global governance because I'm glad we're going to host in South Africa the BRICS Summit. It's also a summit for Global South, and about 40, or if not more, African heads of state will come to South Africa, and there will be a China-African summit as well. So today, if you look at the global order, it's increasingly changing from what's called the vertical order, in which the West is above the rest, to a more horizontal order. The West and the rest are in parallel with each other in terms of wealth, in terms of power, in terms of ideas. Yeah. And finally, I remember former Afghan President Karzai said in an interview in China. He said, if we had the choice to begin again Afghanistan, we would certainly opt for the Chinese model. It's quick, decisive, and result-oriented, and it brings net results to war. So that's a great model. With that, my warm greetings from Shanghai, from my hometown, from China. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for that intervention. So, former President Motlanthe, in your capacity as leader of society, at least we are not in government, so we are not burdened by issues of protocol and what cabinet will have decided, although we are still bound by resolutions of the party. Your reflections, please.
Well, I'm being given a dubious title of leader of society here. It reminds me many years ago when we were still in the union movement. So we met with the generals in the military, and so the introductions around the table was that, so it's Major General so-and-so, General so-and-so, General so-and-so, General so-and-so, General so-and-so. So when it came to my turn, I said, I'm General of 400,000 mine workers. Well, let me thank Professor Zhang Weiwei for this very instructive lecture on the China model. And of course, it would be very difficult for me to lift all the important lessons that he shared with us. But key among them was when he shared with us what transpired between Deng Xiaoping and the then Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, where Deng Xiaoping was explaining to Robert Mugabe, who was suspicious about the model that China was putting forward under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping. And from what I gather here, Deng was able to explain to Prime Minister Robert Mugabe that indeed the Chinese Communist Party was still pursuing socialism. And so he explained to Robert Mugabe that the important element is that they have a communist party. And I think Professor Weiwei has explained down the line that the Communist Party of China is not a party as we understand political parties in the West. It is a party which, as he says, was shaped by the ancient, he goes back to 221 BC, 221 BC, that China was united even at that time, and how they experimented with Western democracy in 1911 and ended up divided, even going into war. And then, of course, that through the leadership of the Communist Party, which engaged in major struggles, including a years of armed struggle for independence. And then he characterizes the period under the leadership of Chairman Mao, and the period under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping. So here, where the lesson for us is that you need leadership of a party that would be debating and ensuring that there is consensus in order to move society forward. So the question that we have to put to ourselves is, do we have such a leadership, an organized leadership? In other words, do we have an organization or party that can provide the kind of leadership that the Communist Party of China provides to the Chinese people? 1.3 billion people. Yeah. So, so that's for me. That's a critical question. That's a key question that we must grapple with. He also emphasized that Deng Xiaoping explained to Prime Minister Robert Mugabe that they are still committed to public ownership of the means of production. That is the Communist Party of China. And that is how they are moving forward. So he then gives us a comparison between the China model and the Western democracy. And of course, as what he didn't say to us is that it is written in the Constitution of China that the Communist Party leads society. So it's a constitutional imperative. Whereas what he explained to us is that we go into elections every 5 years, and we elect and regret. I'm quoting it verbatim. We elect and regret. So in a sense, what is a takeaway for me is that this practice or ritual of going back every 5 years to elect and regret imposes short-termism in how we deal with developmental questions. Whereas the China model is that they can take a long-term view on what, and he said to us that they sequence priorities. They sequence priorities. They identify what their priorities are and sequence them in a manner which is catalytic and developmental. So those are the takeaway points, I think. And also he shared with us that our model, which is he was using the United States, I suppose, as the citadel of Western democracy. So we fall in that camp. So that that is largely driven by ideology and fails to address the basic needs of the rest in society. So the key models of the Chinese, the key elements of the Chinese model, it says people matter. So it's people first, people-centered all the time. So it's always about the people. And of course, in our vocabulary, this is familiar territory. But of course, word of mouth and practice, there's a gap there in our experience. So we must try and strive to always put the people first. So when we say people-centered, it mustn't be a slogan. It mustn't be just words, but that must find expression in deeds as well. And then, of course, he says there's no need for us to be prisoners of dogma. So he says this practice-based reasoning. Like all science, the test must always be in practice. He also says that we must experiment. We must experiment and not just, slavishly try to maintain whatever we inherited was passed on to us. Revolution means change, and so you experiment. But in experimenting, you must bring the sequencing into play. You must factor it in, that are these your priorities or not? And be able to experiment. So they experimented with the economic zones and so on, and he says once the experiment is successful, you then replicate it to the rest of the country. He also, in a sense, defined for us a developmental state. Again, it is familiar territory. We always speak about the developmental state, but he, in a sense, gave it to us in very simple terms, that it must be a proactive, stable state which can plan. These are so it must be a stable, proactive state capable of planning. Yeah, let me, he basically also, broke down the meaning of democracy by the people, for the people. And the three key elements there in terms of eradication of extreme poverty. From the time of Deng Xiaoping, China has succeeded to lift 800 million people out of extreme poverty. It's a phenomenal achievement if you think of it, because it only goes back to the late 70s, really. Post 1976, riots, and this is what they've been able to achieve within that short space of time. And so the eradication of extreme poverty is also based on certain assurances And key among these assurances is that people are assured of food. Food, because without food there is no life. So if you have people who die of poverty and starvation and malnutrition related diseases, then you can't cogently claim to be in a democracy which is for the people. And the second element is that there must be enough clothing for people. The third one is the guarantee for compulsory education. Guarantee for compulsory education. So education is not just a right, it must also be compulsory. I thought those were the key salient points that I picked up. Let me end there, Professor Naweni. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
No, thanks, President. Thanks for that, President. So, colleagues, there are microphones here. The colleagues will be moving around with roving microphones, and they will be going through. Please, just for ease of reference, do state your name. I might know you, but the esteemed panel might not know your name. So please do state your name, and always remember, that's why we've put it up here. Remember the theme. So whilst they do that, Prof, there are people online who are sending me questions. You can answer from there, yes. Yeah, they will turn it on. So there is a few people online who are asking questions, and a number of questions, but there is a common thread in the question they are asking, which is you've spoken about how the states make decisions, how the state prioritizes, how you plan, and there is consensus around the planning. But the main question is, what is it in the psychology, the conditioning, and the skills of public servants that make them diligent and successful in executing these decisions that have been taken by the leadership? Because in the global south, the questions go. In many countries in the global south, there are great policies being adopted by the ruling party, by a cabinet of a country, sometimes even with educated people in the bureaucracy who ought to implement, but things just don't get done. I mean, in here we've got colleagues who run the infrastructure office of South Africa. We've got a DG responsible for planning in South Africa and all other capabilities. What is it in the conditioning and the preparation of an ordinary public servant in China that prepares them to get things done?
Well, I think in the first sense, if you become a public servant and you're a member of the CPC, in theory at least, you should have the minimum, sense of devotion or patriotism for your country. And secondly, planning is also highly technical. In fact, China has learned this from the Soviet Union. Because when New China was founded in 1949, Chairman Mao said, let's learn from the Soviet experience. So we began to formulate the first 5-year plan. The Chinese civil servants, party cadres, produced a draft. And Premier Zhou Enlai brought this draft to Moscow and discussed with the Soviet Planning Commission officials, cadres. And the Soviet Union comrades said, no, it will not work. For you plan the railway, I don't know how many thousand kilometers. Soviet Union comrades said, the Soviet experts said that it's inconceivable in China at that time. You have to cut by half, because when you build the railway, You have built railway stations. For each railway station, you need whatever power plant, repairing plant, etc. It's impossible. So China learned from the Soviet Union. We sent overall in the 1950s about 20,000 students to Soviet Union, not only to learn, this plan is a small part of it, to learn other subjects, to learn physical science, to learn engineering, to learn many other things. So we received help from the Soviet Union. But the point is, by late 1950s, Chairman Mao said the Soviet model has its problems. Basically, we began to move away from Soviet model. So by the time of Chairman Deng Xiaoping, that's open. We said that we should do our own planning. So there is a term. The Soviet planning was called mandatory planning. Literally, you have to plan how many cigarettes people will consume, how many shoes people will wear. It's humanly impossible. So the Chinese system is called strategic planning or indicative planning, sense of direction. Whether you want to say in the next 5 years, what will be your priorities? Bullet train, AI technology. Now, I learned in South Africa, the Chinese cars are selling well, electric cars. This electric cars is the result of 4 5-year plans, 20 years. So now China is the leader in the electric cars. So way down, 20 years back, we were planning where to have enough resources for power, and where do you have what kind of, even each 5-year plan you see there is a readjustment of this. I've just learned, South Africa has a problem with the power supply. In 1980, when I was in the foreign ministry, Deng Xiaoping said, our objective is to increase Chinese economy, GDP, by 4 times by the year 2000. So in 20 years, the economy will be 4 times bigger. Then his next question to Li Peng, then the power minister of power industry, he said, if our economy, GDP, will be 4 times bigger by the year 2000, then how many times the power industry will increase? And Li Peng began to produce a 5-year plan. So now China's power supply is 1/3 of global power supply. Yeah, it's and also the leader in new renewable energies. Yeah, so it's a result of careful planning, both sense of devotion to make your country success, to make your modernization success, and then a lot of expertise. Yeah, which China can provide. How to plan for a city, how to plan for a province, how to plan for a country. Yeah, it's not easy, but a lot of expertise. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna start here at the bottom. Let's do this row first. So 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. Oh, can start there. Start there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll take that set first, then we'll move. Prof will note the questions, and then we'll take about 5, then take the next 5. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't know whether I need to stand. My name is Padilo Hoshal. I'm former statistician general of South Africa. My question, or is it a question? I had the privilege of coming to China in 2013. The question that the Chinese were asking was, in the context of the implications of the economy of China on its population, in the light of the 2010 census, what are the things that China should do? And there were 25 of us invited to meet experts there. And the resolutions were 3. 1 was relax the bedroom to 2 children. 2 was grow China on the basis of domestic consumption, because the relaxed bedroom will provide population to consume Chinese products for a long period of time and continue on leading in exports. Well, you have not been very successful in relaxing the bedroom to two. I know now, it's 3 children. The second point, in 2014, China didn't accept that it was the largest economy, purchasing power parity based. And we met in Paris to discuss this matter, and China continued to refuse to accept those results on the basis of the ICP. And of course, you said, and the result of that was, in our United Nations Statistics Commission, the statement was this, very pragmatic. China doesn't accept the results, but we can use them. My question, my question is, what was going on in China at the time in 2014? Because this was a very tense time for the statistics, well, global statistics community. And that's why we compromised on that statement at the United Nations Statistics Commission. And of course, what are the lessons for us as South Africa on those 2 occasions that I was very deeply involved in with China? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, DG. My name is Khoso Divi, and I'm a former public servant. There's a question that I've been curious about for many, many years. And I've been curious about it because I was born in a developing world, and I grew up in a developing world. And I have noticed that every time a country in a developing world proposes or pursues an alternative economic model, it gets undermined through sanctions, through disinvestment, through the withdrawal of aid. Uganda is a recent example. It happened in South America. It happens all over the developing world. But here's the story of China, which seems to have overcome all of that, which has displayed unbelievable resilience against any threats of any nature by Western countries allied and led by the United States in particular. But China seems to have overcome all these changes, all these threats, all this. How did you do it? That's just my question.
Omano?
Thank you, Busani, and President Mutante. It's good to see you again. Prof. Wei, thank you for illuminating a lecture. I'm going to ask my questions, some for the National School of Government to reflect on, to see whether we are doing what the Chinese have done. I will be asking those questions not to copy, but to see what lessons we can learn from them. But let me take the easiest one out of the way. Professor Weiwei, the National Development and Reform Commission of China, how is it composed? The membership, the staff, are they part-time outsiders, or they are full-time officials of the state? So that is the simplest one. The picture you painted about China, the outcome, I think we all know that. But the institutional architecture, I think, needs some elaboration. So the first one, and I'm going to relate it to the topic, professional and meritocratic bureaucracy. How is it ensured? I know that there is a compulsory entrance examination for every public as the entry level. Please, can you elaborate on that? And how long does it take? Busani, I know it takes about a year to prepare for that examination alone. Who conducts that examination? Is it ministry by ministry, or there is a central agency that conducts that examination? Busani, I know it is a central agency. In our context, and it is in our constitution, the Public Service Commission have been stripped of that power. Then we have what we call, there is no entrance examination. You have what is called interviews. In that context, can we have a meritocratic bureaucracy? Then we know of the Chinese academic of governance, Busani, which is equivalent to your institution. How is it funded? Is it funded by basically making Busani or the head so start running around looking for money, or it is in the budget that the state is responsible for training its civil servants? So I think I want you to be able to reflect on that. Then there is this conversation that goes on in South Africa. The problem in South Africa is deployment. That, the ANC deploy people, and that is the problem. In China, Busani, I know this because I've gone there to do research. About 82% of all civil servants in China are members of the Communist Party. But in terms of population, members of the Communist Party are not up to, they may not be more than 20%. So let me just reflect on this. So is the problem deployment of cadres, or, so just explain to us, why is the deployment system effective in China? Lastly, Busani, I also know this because so that we know this. About 90%, let me say about 90% of all civil servants in China have a 4-year degree and above. Almost half of that have a master's degree and above. In South Africa, Busani, when I look at the data, it is about 20%. So in that context, how can we build a developmental state with what I will put in quote, unqualified civil servant? So those are some of these things that I want you to reflect on, but if our speaker can elaborate on some of this, thank you.
We'll take that, then you can reflect, then we'll take another group.
One, two. Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Prof. two brief questions.
Please remember to introduce yourself.
I was about to
go.
do that, yeah. The name is Velimpele Kasopisi. First question, China does not seem to be trapped in the Western epistemic cage, right? Which means in order for you to develop, you need to westernize, right? Do you think that's a critical ingredient that many countries out of the West can learn from? That's one. Two, you mentioned that China is a civilizational state, right? And you mentioned one of the civilizations in Africa, which is the Kemetic civilization. Do you think if we on the African continent are able to tap into our civilizational splendor, we are likely to also move to higher levels of development? Thank you.
Prof.
Okay. Maybe I try to reply in the reverse order from the last question and then move forward. Well, personally, I think each and every nation should draw a lot of inspirations from its own culture and civilization. Same with Africa. The problem with colonialism is the cut off that tradition. And we think we should reconnect that tradition. Anything, democracy or institutional arrangement, has to be indigenous. Something from a foreign country, it has to be turned into something indigenous before it can really sustain your success. Say, Chinese Communist Party, this whole idea is from the Soviet Union. 5-year planning from the Soviet Union. But gradually, what we use the term is Marxism synicized, become Chinese Marxism. Communist Party become Chinese Communist Party. 5-year plan become Chinese 5-year plan. Really become part of your own. That's important. Otherwise, it's always foreign. It's not appropriate for your modernization. I always say, China learned so much from the West. It's indeed the time for the West to learn a bit from China. And at least I often give some lectures to the Western audience. I said, for instance, I told the British, why bothering with this referendum for Brexit? I said, it's stupid. Yeah, it's only 3.6% difference. Then UK is out of the EU. Yeah, the fate of the nation was decided in such a haphazard way. I humbly advise you to consult Chinese approach, consultative democracy. Yeah. We can at least try to reconcile different opinions by the margin of 30%, at least. If you look at the Chinese Communist Party, we had the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, which is a radical ideology. Then this trend was reversed into, changed into reform and opening up. This whole change was managed, discussed, debated, and finally decisions were made within the Chinese Communist Party, what we call intra-party democracy, consultative democracy, which is better than referendum. Referendum is very old-fashioned. Yeah. And concerning civil servant education, well, in China, this is a very systematic institutional arrangement we call the study system. If you look at the political bureau, every month they have a study session. You can check the agenda for the political bureau study sessions. Say, you can check last year, January, it's AI technology. Then February, it's archaeology. And March, international communications, all kinds of subjects, but very much advanced. And April, maybe military strategy. So they always invite one expert to explain to the political bureau, and then they have discussion, and then Xi Jinping gave a summary, something like that. So that's a practice down to every level of the party and government structure. It's provincial level, municipal level, even county level. And then at each level we have, like your school of National School of Government, but we will have the same name, a National School of Party School at national level, and Government School at national level, but they are now combined into one. So you got party and state schools, national, provincial, municipal levels. So this is already institutionalized. As for organizational department of the CPC, it's very powerful. It's of course both planning, we call the Reform and Development Commission and organizational department are full staff. It's full-time staff. It's very important, arguably the most important institutions within the Chinese political structure. If you look at the economic decision-making, for instance, 5-year plan, now it's already very sophisticated. You can study a case like 5-year planning in China. Usually it's 1.5 years before the next 5-year plan is finished. 1.5 years before your current 5-year plan is finished, they began to produce 5-year plan. All kinds of survey studies, and then consultations, formal, informal. And then State Council produce a formal draft to the Political Bureau. Political Bureau discuss it, and then send draft across the nation. You can give internet feedback, and then National Congress adopt it. And then every year, if you study Chinese economic performance, you follow in every March, end of March usually, there is what we call the 2 sessions, Session of People's Congress and Session of Political Consultative Conference, which discuss maybe 50% economic affairs. You can find a lot of indicators. And then at the end of the year, usually November and early December, we call the CPC Conference on Economic Affairs, every year. Yeah. Then you will check how well we do in the past year and what will be next year. So it's a 5-year plan that every year we have institutional arrangement to monitor the progress. So we can always make constant adjustment, small adjustment all the time. Yeah. It's not just one dead end, no. If you make mistakes, you try to change it. As for the US sanctions, indeed, China is a continental size, and China now has the world's most comprehensive set of industries. In other words, I don't remember the exact figure. Of all the United Nations designated branches and sub-branches of industries, China has all of them. And so that's why we have this manufacturing power, and also the engineers bonus. You have the engineers who can design projects and build projects, and people are hardworking, they can bear all kinds of difficulties. So basically, you have reached a point of tipping point. In other words, US sanctions will have no effect. There is certain effect. United States has already sanctioned 1,300 Chinese enterprises. So since Donald Trump, over the past 4 or 5 years, but none of them got bankrupt. They all have survived well, yeah, including Huawei. Huawei is making huge profits, yeah. And basically, we have this kind of, if you agree with my assessment on the Chinese success in 4 industrial revolutions in one, basically, United States depends more on China than China depends on United States, full stop. So from day one of the trade war, I made a prediction against many predictions, even among Chinese scholars, as the United States will lose the trade war. And if they fight a big war, they will lose bigger. If they fight a small war, they will lose small. So that's my basic assessment. That's true in the end. 95% increased taxes are paid by American companies, American consumers, full stop. The United States is also losing the tech war. Yeah. Why so? Because you can read an article just published 2 weeks ago in National Interest. The author of this article is called David Goldman. It's very easy to remember, David Goldman. The title is United States is losing the tech war with China. Basically, Chinese most advanced technologies, AI, big data, quantum technology, are connected with China's powerful manufacturing industries. And he said in the United States, because of the hollowing out of this industry, manufacturing, as a result, it cannot sustain this kind of AI application for its economy. So it's AI is used for making poems, for liberal arts, but not for all branches of the economy. But in China, it's really updating, improving the quality. All the harbors, most of them in China now, it's 5G connected. You don't need any human being to cooperate. Same with the Chinese electric cars. They are not only, now if you look at the China's trade structure, the goods China exports, it used to be textiles, t-shirts, shoes. Now it's electric cars, this is solar energy equipment, and then the new energy batteries. So China in all these three categories are the leader. Same with, so without this, when you have United States, when this industry is hollowed out, manufacturing is hollowed out, as a result, its sanctions are no longer that effective. And I think the United States will learn a lot of lessons from its trade war and sanctions against China. Same with developing countries. Increasingly, they feel that if we are under sanction by the United States, we simply do trade with China. Alone, we can overcome these difficulties. See, Argentina, problem of the shortage of dollar. Then they began to trade with China. And we borrow the dollar. We have too much dollar. We don't need that much, And then they give us all kinds of goods, whatever. So there is this kind of way. That's why the global South is now more independent. I look at the latest news when Russian leader Putin held this Russia-African summit. 40 African countries participated, half of them heads of state. Unbelievable in the past. So Africans can say no to the United States. We don't care. We go there. Russians are friends. So this is very different. Then if you look at this last year's trade figure, the largest surplus nation is China. Second largest is Russia, despite all the sanctions against Russia. And third largest is Saudi Arabia. So there is an interesting idea from the Chinese language. The Chinese language is very amazing. United States launched a currency war against Russia. Currency in the Chinese language is written this way: goods and money. So Russia has done a wonderful thing. It turned this currency war against Russia into a war between goods and money. You have money, but we have goods. Your money cannot buy our goods. That means South is no longer poor. We have all kinds of, goods available. Not only manufactured goods like China, but also natural resources. That's important, yes. So we should, become the master of our own natural resources. That's the whole message from this recent coup d'etat in Niger. And whatever the result, I don't know. But obviously we have uranium, we have gold. Why we are so poor? They are controlled by foreign countries. So that's the message. So Russia has turned this into, in the end, the Russian currency also has been appreciating. And yes, indeed, in our planning, certain mistakes were made, many mistakes were made. Some, for instance, I tell you very frankly, by the year, Deng Xiaoping has planned in the 1980s for the next 20 years. So China GDP will be 4 times larger. In the end, China achieved that objective 5 years ahead. By 1995, it's already done. So Deng Xiaoping said, what about next 50 years? Can we, quadruple again, 4 times bigger at the level of 1995? In the end, China achieved that objective by the year 2010. So 4 decades ahead. So the plan is out of date by then. So in other words, you have all kinds of wrong forecast. Same with selection of certain industries. It could be, risky. But good thing is China, vast country. Each province, by the way, each province also has its own organizational department and planning department. They also have their plans. They are unique. They have all kinds of experiments. If you are familiar with China, I'll give you an example. A province very close to Shanghai called Anhui province. Its government is more or less like, venture capitalist in terms of investment. They invest in 10 projects. If one is successful, it covers all the costs, and then very successful. So this is one model. There are other models within China, and central government try to pick up based on their experience. So then you have for electric cars, there are different paths of technology. In the end, China decided to focus on this battery system rather than hygiene system. So that's beginning from the 3rd 5-year plan. So there is all kinds of choices. The point is you need to have feedback from industry, from the society, whether in terms of policy, in terms of personnel. The Chinese state and the party is the one that use most public opinion surveys than any government in the world. To promote a cadre, say in Shanghai, to the bureau of whatever, chief, they need a kind of opinion surveys. Sometimes open, public, sometimes internal surveys. I'll give you an example which I experienced. When I was in the foreign ministry in the 1980s, the organizational department came to foreign ministry and said, we want to promote one particular individual to the position of a deputy minister. So this behind door discussions, I was just an interpreter. You were also involved. So you present your opinions. And then later on, I learned a bit from their trick. They hold this kind of what they call the seminar discussions. He said, usually, the most popular one is not chosen because he could be nice to everyone, but not necessarily competent, or even very mediocre, So the decision power, same with the least popular one, is usually out, no doubt about this. The most popular one may not be the choice. The least popular is out. Then you choose from maybe number 2 to number 5 and try to balance each other, So this is my own experience from the internal democracy, intra-party democracy. Thank you.
Let's take another round. We'll take 5, starting here. Okay. So the gentleman, wait. So it's number 1, number 2. She's got a mic already. 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll take all these hands. Those will be the last hands. Cool. They will come to you. Let's only ask one question, please, colleagues. Without like peroration and introductions and prefaces.
Thanks, Busani. I'm David Maimela from UNISA. Thank you, Prof, for a very illuminating lecture. I always enjoy your lectures. I just have a slightly different take to yours, because I believe that what you refer to as the Chinese model, especially in relation to the development model, is actually a global model, because the economic history of Europe and America, especially in the post-war period, is actually that of state-led development. Brown industrial development, massive investment in research and development. The current giant tech industry that you see in the US has been heavily invested by the state through research. You can talk about infant industry protection, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, even today, the still heavy agricultural subsidies to protect the farmers in the United States. So, historically, the role of the state in the development process has always been embraced across the board, whether in the West or in the East, whether in a socialist or a capitalist social formation. And therefore, it's only after 1980, I think when you make that contrast on the development model, it's only after 1980 that then all of us are being told that you must abandon the state-led development. Now, Busani, I don't think we have a problem per se about the type or the mentality of the public servant in South Africa. I think there are multiple factors that affect government, bureaucratic, and state performance. I'll just mention them quickly without belaboring the point. Is that you have a problem of capacity, right? So, for instance, I was very much interested, one thing that is very striking and very important for South Africa, Prof, by the way, is what you said at the bottom there. The balance between the three powers, political, social, and capital. In South Africa, I don't know, whether it's because of our model of democracy, that balance is not balanced, right? So if you take, for instance, the just energy transition, I want to speak about the capacity thing. If you take just energy transition, the idea, the funding, the pace at which you do it, how you prioritize and sequence it, is not defined by us. So it speaks to the question of the balance of power within the country. You can make many other examples. National health insurance, we want to reach what China has reached and what the UK has reached. A massive battle around that. You can look at various landmark cases that are either in the Constitutional Court or in the High Court. Massive imbalance in terms of power in the contestations. So when I think for us the biggest lesson, right, besides the question of leadership, of course, we can talk about that for days. The biggest lesson for us is, how do you, in our context here, deal with that power balance so that you can actually succeed in actually leading development as a country. That for us is very important. But now we have adopted the idea of a just energy transition, but the capital is not from us, you see. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Izima Lachi from the National School of Government. Prof, you mentioned that China leads by example. So my question is, what can South Africa learn from China in terms of developing youth, today's youth, to become tomorrow's leaders? Because currently, our youth unemployment rate is standing at a staggering 45.3%. Thank you.
Ephraim, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prof, for a useful presentation. You have painted a very beautiful, my name is Ephraim Megwa from the National School of Government also. You have painted a very positive, picture about China. It actually wants me to go to China tomorrow. But my question is related almost to what Dr. Malachi has just asked. I've seen in the news and reading somewhere that you are also experiencing a high level of unemployment among young people. And I wanted to find out if that is true, number one, because the picture that you have painted was to say that we need to be suspicious of what we read in the media. Is it true that there is high levels of unemployment among young people? And if so, why is that the case? And what is the country doing about the issue of the rising unemployment among young people in China? Thank you.
Hello,
Go
can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Dr. Mwekiti Musola. I'm the managing director of Top Q Properties, so I'm not from government, I'm from the private sector. And thank you very much for bringing this particular lecture at the University of South Africa, because at least now we have the freedom and the protection of the university to speak our minds, you see? Because in South Africa, when you speak your mind, you get marginalized. You get victimized. So the university provides a good platform where we can speak our minds without any fear and or favor. And on that note, I want to start with the question by Chairman Deng, answering President Mugabe when he says that we have the Communist Party. And that for me refers to leadership. I'm not going to be as diplomatic as President Motlanthe was in trying to deal with that question. Because President Motlanthe said that we must reflect on that question. We know what the answer is. We do not have the Communist Party. We do not have the leadership. Why do I say that? In this country, in the last 10 years, we elected a president who read at the level of a grade 3 student, could not read and could not write, managed to go all the way up to the top of the ruling party and also became the head of the state. In your input, you said, in China today, it's virtually inconceivable that someone like that can rise to the leadership of the Communist Party. Now, the issue here is that meritocracy is not only for the public sector, it's also how political parties elect its own leadership. So, for an example, then you cannot have somebody like Fikile Mbalula, who has a standard 10, who is being a secretary general of the ruling party. So there's a lot of reflection to do there about how leaders are actually elected in our country and who actually gets to rule us and to govern us. That is also true, by the way, for the Democratic Alliance. They fired Mmusi Maimane, who had 2 master's degrees, who was the leader of the party. They replaced him with some guy who has a standard 10, who then tells us then we have to have meritocracy and degree in order to run government. So I'm not talking about political parties, I'm talking about leadership and the type of leadership that is required to be able to lead the state. My question then therefore, is it correct, Prof, that meritocracy is not only relevant to the public service. Certainly, the political parties themselves have to look at themselves and determine what kind of people they actually bring to govern the society. Lastly, you talk about self-belief. That one of the things that has been consistent about China is that China believes in itself and its capability. And that has helped China to be able to really do a whole lot of things. Now, in South Africa, we have done some amazing things. We negotiated our democracy. It's not perfect, but we did. Our scientists are very, very, very good. In fact, our scientists are competing worldwide when coming to the production of malaria vaccine. We provide Africa with malaria, and we make it here in South Africa. Our sportsmen and women are competitive at the global level. Yet, when it comes to running the affairs of the country, we look up to the US or we look up to China, and we lose that self-belief that we have. Is it correct, therefore, Prof, to say that one of the most powerful ingredients in really leading society is to have that self-belief, that South Africa needs to know that it's good. We are good at what we do. And therefore, we must have that self-belief in ourselves and our people in terms of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's Mandla Ntlanganiso here. I'm a public servant. South Africa is deemed to have the best constitution in the world, President Motlanthe. But 3 days ago, the World Bank have just issued the unemployment rate, and South Africa has got the highest unemployment rate in the world. Best constitution, highest unemployment rate. To me, the issue of constitutionalism, because South Africa is deemed, as one of the countries when it comes to the constitution, but it does not translate to the day-to-day living of South Africans. If you look just on unemployment, we don't want to go to health and other issues that we can talk about. So in China, is there a correlation between the constitution? Because some would say that human rights issues are being dealt with not in a good way in China, whilst we're talking about the economy. Two, Prof, on this meritocracy, the issue of accountability, how far do you go with that? Because in South Africa, we've got the best terminologies and concepts. As you can see there, the mission of the National School of Government to empower public servants responsive to citizen needs. But most public servants, they don't use public health institutions. It's a contradiction. We have these beautiful concepts, but in terms of implementation and accountability, I mess up in this department, I got expelled, I get a promotion in another department, same government. So for me, I want to check at the issue of accountability and how far do you go? Because in South Africa, we are rotating. The latter speaker have just explained that if you are popular, you can go to the highest office. So for me, that's the main issue, that as government, as servants, how far do you go in terms of making sure that starting from the clerks to the cleaner, if you are a government servant, you do account for the taxpayers' money. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, those are the last two hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for elaborate presentation. I will not be controversial. My name is Gideon Malco. I work for the African Union Development Agency. Two questions. Every system of governance is not perfect, and I think that's a good starting premise. For us, I don't know if you can elaborate maybe 3 main fault lines. You elaborated the fact that learning is a key critical ingredient for the system of governance. So what are the fault lines that we as African countries can learn from your model, particularly for issues of manufacturing and to some extent industrialization? So that's number one. On your slide, the slide that you had on by the people. I was paying key attention to it. How do you get citizenry participation in the decision-making process for all the levels that you did talk about? Because to me, it did not come out quite clearly. Does it exist? And if it exists, how do you go about it? Thank you.
There's a lady, yeah.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, my prof, Ntate Motlanthe, Ntate Robert, and our program director. My name is Kemi Matato, and I'm a retired auditor, risk manager of the public sector. My question is one. I still would like to hear your thoughts on the success rate of women participation or the effect that women have in the decision-making processes or executive positions, roles in China. Thank you.
Thank you. Some of the questions that are online, Prof, are more or less the same as what has been asked. So I will request you to respond and and summarize the key message from your lecture. Of course, some colleagues who want to continue engaging. We've got another session tomorrow in Sentin with HSRC and others. We can engage there. So, Prof, over to you.
Yeah, I will perhaps summarize a few replies to your many questions. Yes, indeed, if we put aside neoliberalism since 1980s, indeed, even Western economic textbooks refer to the role of the state. So you are fair, in saying that many of the Chinese model, its features are maybe valid for other countries as well. But there are also some important differences. One is the scale of the country, of China. It's 1.4 billion people. And the regional diversity, it's amalgamation of hundreds of states into one. That adds a lot to challenge for the leadership. And furthermore, the international environment, the economic order, as I mentioned, this center-peripheral relationship is not fair for developing countries. There is an economist called Prebisch from Latin America. He made a point in the 1960s. He said the poor country in the South, cannot become modernized and developed. Why? Because he used the term underdevelopment. He used this word as a verb. So we, South countries, are constantly underdeveloped by the international system. In other words, the order is extremely unfavorable. The Western powers simply want to keep the South in producing raw materials. In the case of China, in producing T-shirts, not satellites or whatever 5G technologies, because that will become very competitive. So this is the problem. This is how breaks through each and every step. If we all believe in economic rationale, free trade, free competition, the price will go down. It's good for China, for the United States. Many Chinese still believe so. But the Americans said, no, 5G, you must. As one of them, the right wing said, we need to destroy Huawei at whatever cost. So this is unfair trade. So since you impose war on us and we take it on. So this is, in other words, economics purely is not economic. It's always in the political environment. If we understand that, our understanding of the current economic development will become more sophisticated. For the youth, I really encourage more exchanges between Chinese youth and African youth, including those from South Africa. We've just received a delegation from South Africa. We held a meeting in Kunming, and more are coming. I think it's always better to have more communications with each other to have better understanding. Indeed, I have traveled and visited over 18 African countries, and I feel that the Chinese model, good or bad, is much more relevant for Africa. In the sense that for the Chinese government, they never say, we will export our model. No, we don't want to export our model to others, indeed, because we learn a lot of lessons from the Soviet Union imposing its model on China, from the United States imposing its model on China. It's not effective, it's not good. But there are many aspects as a scholar, I feel many aspects of Chinese model could be relevant. For instance, this whole idea of industrial zones. You may not be able to change the whole country quickly, but you can change one particular area, one city. That's possible. And that could be an experiment. If it's working, that model can draw inspiration and encourage others to follow. And 5-year plan as well, not necessarily 5-year plan, could be 2-year plan, could be 10-year plan. It could be plan for a country, could be plan for a region, for a province, for a city. And this kind of experience as well. And also, you have a better understanding in the case of China. After all, I said that Chinese socialism has succeeded. You can see how socialism has worked. It's different from what Karl Marx has imagined. It's different from the Soviet Union, Soviet model. In the Chinese model, private sector plays a very important role. It creates 90% jobs. It contributes 50% of state revenues, etc. How they combine, for instance, I mentioned this idea of why China leads 5G revolution and leads in smartphone, one smartphone you can do everything, because the state sector responds for the infrastructure. Order from the Communist Party, every village must have Wi-Fi signals, you have to cover, yeah. And then private sector, Ali, etc., Ali, they make best use of this availability of the first-rate infrastructure, highway, bullet train, digital infrastructure, and then turn the e-commerce into the largest in the world. So there is this. Concerning this human rights and the youth, etc., jobs, indeed, China has always maintained this position. It's from the Chinese tradition as well. I call the Chinese model as people's livelihood-oriented model, and Chinese democracy as people's livelihood-oriented democracy. The Chinese are very pragmatic people. We hate empty talks. A president like Obama came to power and say, change. After 8 years, no change. His only change is this medical insurance bill, and then overthrown by Donald Trump. No, that's not the way. The words from Xi Jinping or from Prime Minister, every word counts, You have to, if you look at the work report of Chinese government every March, they will tell you, Prime Minister will say, last year we made a commitment to fulfill 11 tasks. Now we have fulfilled 10 and half, exactly which had not been fulfilled. So there is a target, and then to what degree after 1 year, after 5 years, fulfilled or not fulfilled. It's discussed, and Prime Minister said, we have done this, balance sheet is there. So we always say, right of development, right of livelihood are as important as political and civil rights. So there should be a balance. Now, concerning this last two questions were highly political concerning domestic politics in South Africa. I'm not in a position to make comment. But indeed, I have a lot of hope for South Africa. The Communist Party of China had this tradition from the Soviet Union. from Leninism, as you mentioned, Leninist. The party is supposed to be a vanguard force to lead. So this idea of vanguard, I think, is also valid for maybe African politics. In the case of South Africa, I think South Africa should play the role as a vanguard for the whole Africa. So ANC should have a greater ambition to do more. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
President Motlanthe, any parting shots?
No, Busani, I think Prof has covered all the key points, except the point that he made about the size of China and therefore the scale of the plans. But he's also left us with the advice that in terms of experimentation, we can actually, we can take Mpumalanga and tap into natural gas and create an experiment in creating an economy based on gas, and therefore deal with our problems of load shedding. A week ago, I was with Babsim Langeni, who's 80 years old now, and he said to me that his parents told him that he lost his eyesight when he was 3 years old. And so he says, you people are complaining about 6-hour load shedding, stage 7, stage 8. I've been on load shedding for 77 years, he says. And he says, look at me. So the point I'm making really, Busan, is that we must try and experiment. We have natural resources. Prof has indicated that, money and goods, we have goods. And so we should be striving for winning the right to decide what our priorities are and how we sequence them and so on. Yeah. Thank you.
DG Nkuna, South Africans are very impatient with us as public servants.
Okay, good afternoon. This afternoon. Okay, thank you. Let me recognize former President Motlanthe, Prof. Weiwei, and distinguished guests and participants. I'm going to be very brief and deal with some of the systemic issues that have come up. Now, as a point of departure, let me indicate that South Africa does have plans. Government has plans. We have the National Development Plan, we have the medium-term strategic framework, which is the 5-year plan of government. And there are several other plans, the National Special Development Framework. So we do have plans. And I think when we have these conversations, even when we're troubled, we must not say that there are no plans. I think we must say there are plans. Then the debate becomes a separate one of whether those plans are working or whether we are implementing the plans. Because saying that there are no plans can be very problematic because it will not be stating the truth. Now, having said that we do have plans, the question is why are we not winning? Why are we not achieving the results that we seek to achieve? Because like China, we have similar aspirations to serve our people. So all our documents are littered with that commitment to serve the people. So there's no gainsaying that that is what we seek to do. But the reality of the situation is that we are faced with challenges. Now, very quickly, the question is, what can we take out of what you have said with respect to the challenges that we face? The first issue is that of substance versus form. It's a very big issue. You might have said it in one line, but I think it's a very big issue that we need to take forward as South Africans and talk about that, because there is a conflation of substance versus a form. Just maybe to give a quick example, if you have a municipality that has been dysfunctional for the last 30 years and life goes on, we are all fine. That is not happening. Once that happens, it means that we are on the side of form and not a substance. Because if we are dealing with substance, you can't have a dysfunctional municipality for 30 years. It can't happen. So I would suggest that we have this discussion amongst ourselves as public servants, but it has also serious political leanings, and hopefully those who are in politics, who are in the room, will also grapple with the same issue of form versus substance. The other issue is that we have a plan to grow the economy by 5.4% from 2012 to the end of to 2030, when we complete the implementation of the NDP. Now, that is not happening. And the question is, what are the kind of challenges that we're grappling with? Very quickly, one can say that the issue of prioritization is a very big issue. We are struggling really to choose what it is that we want to do. But even where we make choices, we are proving to be wanting. For example, if you ask anyone from the economic cluster of government, they will tell you that we are pursuing industrialization in South Africa, that there is something called industrialization that is going on. And the question is whether that is true. Unless industrialization means different things to different people. So what we can learn from this presentation is that we must mean what we say and say what we mean and be very specific in terms of what we want to do. So that, as one colleague indicated, we must not be seized with big concepts, but when you look at the substance that goes with those concepts, is found one thing. Issues around innovation, they are very big issues that we can say about it. Now, at the center of the discourse that arises from what we have heard is whether there is a relationship in our case between the ideology of the developmental state and the quest for efficiency in how we do things. So that we don't only use the big terms, developmental state, but when you go and check what it is that constitutes the developmental state, we have found one thing. Let's take the case of the post office. When a state entity collapses to an extent of getting a business rescue, it turns upside down the whole discourse around a developmental state. Whether a developmental state can have a state entity that collapses after receiving billions and billions of bailouts. So again, it goes back to substance versus form, because we use the big terms, but when you look at the substance, so we are taking that point, as you have said. Lastly is around the bureaucracy. The developmental states that we always compare ourselves with used to have a concept of autonomous bureaucracy, embedded bureaucracy, and whether you can have that in South Africa. And most colleagues argue that what we have in South Africa is more political-led kind of a developmental state that is led by the bureaucracy. And we can have debates around such comparison, including whether they matter. But on the issue of meritocracy, what is interesting at present is that DGs themselves are the ones who are leading this discourse around the professionalization of the public service. So we have a situation where the public servants themselves have taken it upon themselves to say that we are going to lead the professionalization of the public service. But there may be a limit to that when the political leadership is merely reacting to what is being proposed, because in our view, the issue of the professionalization of the public service should be inherent in a developmental state. But once you have a situation where DGs end up being lobbyists, lobbying ministers, lobbying the president to deal with this fundamental issue of meritocracy and associated issues that deal with professionalization, it means that we are on a wrong path. So in conclusion, all what one can say is that there is a lot to learn from China. I know most of us go to China, but the problem is when we arrive in China and ask about where Chairman Mao was born, you know, we find that we're interested about the birthplace of Chairman Mao, but the Chinese are always asking us very specific questions. They can ask you when you're in China, who is going to be the CEO of the ACBC? Who's going to be the CEO of the National Empowerment Fund? And only to find that on our side, we say, when was the Great Wall built and everything? So I'm raising this so that our engagement with our Chinese colleagues should be meaningful, should be specific, should be focused so that we can assist each other. I think I've done justice with the 10 minutes that I was given. Thank you.
Thank you, DG Nkuna. I've been there where Chairman Mao was born. I saw the place, yeah. And there's a lot of stories about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues here present and online, I must thank you first for taking interest in joining us in this important conversation. As the National School of Government, we are constantly creating opportunities for learning, for discourse, because we cannot sharpen practice as public servants unless we have a full understanding and a full view of comparative development models, as was the case today. And we did a session on breaking the glass ceiling recently. We did Mariana Mazzucato on the entrepreneurial state. A few months later, we will be doing several other sessions as well, including on leading digital transformation in the public sector. We've done one. We've got few that are coming on leading the just transition, because we believe that from the most junior to the most senior of public servants, we need to immerse ourselves with this kind of debate. Oftentimes, public servants encounter a problem and they think they are the first in the world to encounter such a problem, when in fact there's hundreds and millions other people who've come across a similar problem and they have solved it. And that's because it's not everybody who could read the book every week like the former president does. We think that when we arrange master classes like these ones, you could have read Prof. Weiwei's book, The China Way, in the last 2 hours that you have been here, and hopefully you will be inspired to learn and read more about it. So thank you to the University of the Land. UNISA is called University of the Land by those who live here, because it's the biggest university in the southern hemisphere, partnering with the fastest growing school of government in the continent. Our peers say so, at least, associating with very sound scholars from the continent and beyond, including those in the private sector as well, who are part of building this brand. But most importantly, we're not building a brand because we want to sell it. We are not Coca-Cola. We are building a brand because it needs to have content and impact in the lives of the public servants who are coming through us. As we are all aware, professionalization framework was approved by a cabinet last year, which means that, Prof. Zhang, there is an examination system now in place. We have piloted the National School of Government. We are expanding that to include integrity tests and several other tests. There's a compulsory induction program, and I know several departments, if you fail to do an induction, you do not get pay progression when your performance is assessed, which is great because it means everybody will have to go through the induction program. And of course, there are other measures that have been put in place now to make sure that public servants do indeed return to the simulator. And I always make a point, former president, in next week, we have over, 40 heads of states who are coming here. The person who is, I suppose, may use China being the biggest country, maybe in India. The people who are piloting the Air Force One of China and the Air Force One of India, who will be coming here, being the largest nations in the world with big military and so on. Even though they have reached the apex of their career in flying in the Air Force, that they can fly a president from Beijing to South Africa, that is still not enough. In fact, they constantly return to the simulator as a minimum condition for them retaining the flying license, but also retaining the right to fly ahead of state. The point being, as public servants, we must come back to the simulator, which is the NSG, which is UNISA, and many other training institutions in the country, so that we can sharpen our practice, as it was indicated, and be able to serve our people better. In Singapore, where yourself and President Deng learned about some models of development, they have the motto, or the Batupile, people first, you call it in China. The motto there is, will you serve your mother the same way? And that every public servant has to deal with this existential question. Will you serve your mother the same way? If you can't answer that, then you don't belong to the system. You will serve your mother the same way when she's applying for a passport or any other essential document, when she's applying for a grant or a housing, or even applying, to be a student, or whatever the case might be. So the challenge is set, colleagues. Please go forth and do well. Where we must wish well the country and the president who's hosting a BRICS next week, with all the officials who are supporting that, and we are sure that the world is about to experience our hospitality, but importantly, great ideas and solutions that will be generated there. Thank you to the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, who is here. He will be asking us some questions, President, later on, because we are held accountable by Parliament. Thank you to DG Lubisi, who's a distinguished fellow of the National School of Government, the leadership of the NGO, Phoebe Potgieter, Makura, who's in charge of political education, and all others, former SG, and everybody else who's here. So we end here. Good luck. Have a good day. Thank you.